Early Social Formation, Amar Farooque books. First topic is human evolution. The human species represent the most advanced stage of a long process of evolution, which began with the formation of Earth nearly 46 million years ago and the emergence of earliest form of inanimate matter about 3500 million years ago. This does not mean that the process of evolution has come to an end. There is continuous changes in nature, but changes which result in the evolution of new species are usually spread over such a long time spent, often millions of hundreds of thousands of years, that they are not easily apparent. As a matter of fact, the human mind cannot easily comprehend the time spent over which is the evolutionary process in nature in spread. Humans are accustomed to dealing with time a comparatively minute scale. There is another aspect of changes which has to be taken into account. With the emergence of human, a qualitatively new situation has arisen. Human intervention itself has become a factor, and biological natural evolution is not the only option. Human intervention implies cultural adaptation, and this has opened up several new possibilities. The evolutionary process is not confined to biological evolution alone. It is relatively recently, during the latter half of the 19th century, that the theory that human beings are the product of an evolutionary process was first advanced. This revolutionary theory was first developed by Charles Darwin 1809 to 1882, an English scientist completely transformed our way of looking at nature and ourselves. He accompanied a 5 years long naturalist expedition to various parts of South America and the Pacific abroad, the ship HMG Vega. The expedition visited some very remote island and provided Darwin with an opportunity to acquaint himself with numerous unfamiliar features of plant and animals life in those regions. During the course of these voyages, Darwin accumulated a vast amount of information at first hand about various variety of plant and animals. The material collected by him on this expedition and his subsequent research led to the publication of his pathbreaking work, The Origin of Species in 1859. In his book, Darwin outlined his theory of evolution. Darwin's work was preceded by significant development in natural science during the 18th and early 19th century. Considerable headway had been made, for instance, in the classification of plant and animals. An important contribution to his classification was made by the Swedish botanist Linnaeus Carlban Linné, 1707 to 1778. Classification based on criteria which have been scientifically worked out requires grouping together of plant animals which have certain characteristics, thereby introducing some order in the available data about polling variety of living organisms. Systematic classification made it easier to perceive differences and similarities between various species. By the end of 18th century, scientists were beginning to think its term of nature having a history, that the natural world had not come into existing as a finished product at a given moment, but had evolved through a historical process. It had a history just as human societies have a history. The French scientist Georges de Buffon, 1707 to 788, argued in his several volume work Natural History that the natural world had changed over a period of time. The contemporary natural world was different from what it was like in early ages to related development which assisted providing firm basis for the concept of evolution or emergence. Zoology as a scientific discipline and the study of fossils. Zoology is essentially the scientific study of the origin, structure, and composition of the earth, especially its rock. Fossils are imprints of animals or plants which lived long ago preserved in rocks. In the case of animals, these are usually remains of the herder's bird, bones and shells, which have left a permanent mark on the rock while that rock is in the process of hardening. The hardened rock would then bear the shape of given animal, plant, bird. Fossils provide us evidences about animal or plant which lived several hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago. They are our main sources of information about species which have become extinct, as for instance dinosaurs. Fossils are basically rocks, therefore they have to be studied with the assistance of geologists. The development of the science of rock helped to interpret fossils. Zoology was the means to establishing the antiquity of the fossils and the environment in which the fossilized organism had lived. Of course, early geology could only indicate the fossil sequence in which one fossil relatively to another would have evolved without providing actual dates. One could say that a fossil was earlier, later or contemporary when compared with another, but what was the crucial at that stage was the suggestion of changes having occurred in nature over a period of time. We will return to the question of fossils a little later. All this development in science prepared the ground for the work of Chevalier de Lamarck 1744 to 1829. Lamarck was a French scientist who was appointed botanist to the King of France a few years before the French Revolution and was the professor of zoology in Paris after the Revolution, in whose writings, which included the 7-volume work Natural History of Invertebrate Animals published between 1815 to 1822. Lamarck made the central point that plant and animal species underwent changes. They were not static under changing entities. The species were not fixed but could change from one generation to the next. This was an important step towards explaining the enormous diversity of living organisms in terms of evolution. Fossils evidence confirmed that species had undergone changes, that some life form had died out, while new ones had evolved and got diversified. Lamarck's understanding of these changes was, however, simplistic and scientifically incorrect. He suggested that changes occur when a particular part of an animal was either put to more frequent use or was not regularly used. This might cause the part to become larger and conversely disease would result in smaller organs. If this assisted in better adaptation, the changes might be passed on the successive generation. This would give rise to species with different characteristics. Unfortunately, this Lamarckian understanding has at times been confused with Darwin's extremely sophisticated theory of evolution. The main thesis propounded by Darwin was that species have evolved due to minor variation in individual members of species. This variation may be inherited by the offspring as a result of long cumulative process, often over several hundred thousand or millions of years. The variation will end up in the emergence of new species. The successes of this variation is better adaptation or more efficient survival determines whether the variation continue to be passed on. The principle of heredity makes it possible for the offspring to inherit the variation, which in turn are passed on to their offspring. If the variation does not result in death or less efficient adaptation, it might continuously be passed on to successive generations. This implies natural selection. The fittest will select survival of the fittest. The continuous struggle to survive, to adapt more efficiently is also to be seen in the context of competing demand of other living organisms on the resources of given environment. In any case of the environment itself is not a fixed one but also changes over a period of time, necessitating adjustment and additional factors in coping with the environment and contributing to the instant struggle for survival in the increase in population of a species which has adapted successfully in given environment. Minor variation could equip an organism to compete better by a community. Process a new species or several new species might arise. We survive in that environment in different ways. By surviving better would be mean not just being able to live but also reproduce successfully. There are two important points to be borne in mind. One is that from one generation to the next the variation are very small. If they were not minor in the offspring with variation would just not survive. These changes take place over a very long time, involving several hundred thousand generations. Every generation will have its own branches and sub-branches, and so on. At every level, there will be the possibility not only of old variation being carried forward, but new variation being introduced. As successive generation branches out, a new variation might be introduced in varying combinations. All members of a given generation will therefore not have the same set combination of variation. Thus, the variation branches will evolve differently. Different bring us to second point. Every variation must not be thought of an improvement. There could be many variations which by themselves or when combined with earlier received variation might result in the dead end. The mathematical possibilities for differentiation. When the astronomical number of generations multiplied by possible variation is taken into account are literally mind-boggling. This accounts for the kind of diversity which we find among living organisms. Not only did Darwin provide a plausible theory for understanding the dynamics of evolution, but also placed human beings within this process. It was this part of Darwin theory that many people found difficult to accept. There was a lot of opposition to his views. Darwin pointed out that humans were as much a product of evolution as other living organisms. Human being did not arrive ready-made. They evolved from earlier and more primitive life form. He fully developed his argument about human evolution in his later work Descent of Man, 1871. The argument outlined in this work has been generally confirmed by subsequent scientific research. The farther back we go in time and larger the number of species with which we share common ancestor, starting with the common ancestor of apes, those of primitives, of mammals, vertebrates, and those of multicellular organisms, etc., till we eventually trace our step back through several million years to single-cell organisms. We have so many common features because we have common ancestor. This point is that we are not just descended from apes, who only happen to be nearest to us in the evolutionary trees, but also from some of the most primitive life form as well. As 20th century advances in science have demonstrated, we share with them a very essential feature: DNA or genes are the basis of life as we know it. These are molecular structures which are distinguished from molecules of non-living life forms of matter primarily by their ability to self-replicate, to make copies of themselves, and to transmit the interaction for further self-replication to their copies, thereby setting in the motion a continuous process of reproduction and evolution. DNA are long chain of small molecules. These small molecules, nucleotides, are joined together forming a lengthy chain. This chain, located on chromosomes, contain the information something like computer memory or a floppy disk, which determine the specific character of a living organism. This information is the genetic code of a species. The code or the information contained in the DNA provides instructions which are used in the process of building up cells of animals and plants. Different kind of cells in the living organisms use information in the DNA that is relevant to the building of their type of cells. There will be different type of cells performing different function, but each cell in given organisms will have the same code DNA. This DNA must be thought of as a vast storehouse of information which has been passed on to that organisms in the process of evolution. All the information might not even be used in that species. It has been pointed out that DNA of even very primitive animals might contain more information than all the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica put together. It needs to be emphasized that the information contained in the DNA will be that which is conducive to survival of an organism. The transmission of the genetic code containing all the accumulated information of the species take place during the course of reproduction. As we have already noted, the distinctive feature of DNA is that they are self-replicating, the ability to make copies of themselves and to pass on the instruction for making further copies in what make them different from other molecules. The ability to reproduce is what defining living organisms, otherwise living as well as non-living forms of matter, are just molecules. This special quality of DNA to make copies of itself and the instruction contained in those copies to make further copies is what set in motion the process of evolution. What has happened over nearly 3,500 million years is that the copies have not always been exact. There have been very small errors at times. This is given rise to possibilities for changes. All copies are not necessary to actually exactly identical. New type of organisms have therefore evolved. DNA has a remarkable capacity for making exact copies without any errors. The copies are normally free of errors and remain so for long periods of time during which several millions error-free copies might be made. But reproduction is such a complex process that once in a while there could be minor error mutation. Just one small bit of information may be wrongly copied or transmitted. Since the data or information with which we are dealing is so large, there are as many possibilities as to what the actual errors or mutation will be. Whether or not the mutation is retained will be depend on the extent in which it enables the organisms to survive. Through natural selection and long cumulative process, mutations which are retained and transmitted to successive generations will result in the evolution of new species. It is remarkable that nearly 150 years after the publication of Origin of Species, Darwin theory remains the most satisfactory hypothesis that we have for understanding the evolution, including the evolution of human species. This is all the more astonishing when we realize that Darwin did not have access to the knowledge which revolutionary advances in science during the last 50 years or so have placed at the disposal of today scientists. The vast domain of molecular biology which has emerged only recently has sustained Darwin theory. It is only now that scientists are beginning to understand the precise details of the evolutionary process. Though there still remain many mysteries to be unraveled, but facts by themselves cannot explain much unless one has a working hypothesis. It is not as though Darwin knew all that modern genetics tells us, but as with any good theory, Darwin theory can be updated with new facts as they emerge without altering the underlying principle of that theory. Darwin theory is now widely accepted by scientists. A few scientists have, however, suggested that some aspects of Darwin evolutionism need to be modified. It has been argued that the total time that has elapsed since the emergence of life is not sufficient to account for the large number of species that has evolved. If we think in the term of evolution taking place at a gradual pace, according to Stephen Joy Galt, Darwinian theory indicated very slow and gradual changes. Galt's view is that while there were long periods when almost no changes took place, there were short phases when there were a burst of evolutionary activities. There is different from the suggestion that large changes occur in the one jump. It only means that some critical mutation might lead to the quickening of evolution for brief periods. The evolutionary process was speeded up by this burst. Galt's argument is mainly derived from his interpretation of fossils evidences. Galt himself is paleontologist, specialized in the study of fossils. As we noted earlier, fossils were some of the earliest clues that pointed in the direction of evolution. While 19th century zoology was of limited help in making sense of fossils find, the breakthrough is the discipline come about the later half of the 20th century with advances in chemistry and physics. These advances, which have also enriched zoology, had made a paleontology is a much more precise science. We now have a fairly good idea about species which have become extinct. Paleontologists like Gold find it disturbing that there are some very big gaps in the fossil's evidence. These gaps is pointed out cannot be only due to the fact the fossils belonging to intermediate stages have not been discovered. What if there were never or were any intermediate stages? This is the main question posed by Gold. If the evolution occurred in Zerg versus then it is the kind of fossils evidences that we would have. Research Dawkins and eminent geologist comprehensively refuted Galt's argument by emphasizing that such sudden periods of changes would initially make adaptation very unlike for the group with different characteristics. There are several ways in which gaps in fossils evidences can be explained. The most obvious is that a small group could have got separated from the main population and might have started evolving in isolations. If after a long period of evolution during which it evolved into a new species, it returned to the original location. The fossils evidences is that location might now up to different species without the intermediate stage. For us to know of the intermediate stages of evolution, we would also have to find fossils at the site where the separated group had evolved. Such comprehensive findings are unlikely. We are thus left with big gaps. Among the species which are extant, apes and monkeys bear the closest resemblance to human beings. Monkeys, apes, and humans all share a large number of characteristics. They They are all placed by scientists in one broad group. To use scientific terminology, they are classified as belonging to the same order: monkeys, apes, humans, and few other animals like lemurs belong to the order primate. Primates are the part of broader group mammalians, vertebrates, or vertebrates, fish, amphibious, birds. Living mammals have the backbone, which is a column of discs. Vertebrate enclosing the spinal cord. This backbone gives internal support of the body. Mammals have 4 legs or limbs. Their bodies are covered with hair. They are warm-blooded animals. Their body temperature remains relatively constant. Female mammals give birth to live offspring. They do not lay eggs. There are, however, some rare species of mammals like the Platypus and the Anteater in which the females lay eggs. Montheridium mammals. Then there are some species of mammals in which the young are born before being properly developed. These are termed marsupials. The mother has a paw. The most familiar example is the kangaroo, in which the baby marsupial completes its development. What is common to all mammals is that the females of species has mammary gland in which secretes milk to feed the young. The earliest primitive evolved with fissures which enable them to adapt to living efficiently in trees. Primitive have fissures which allow them to climb and move about one trees with great ease. They use their forelimbs extensively. Their nails are flattened and the thumbs of the hand is opposed to the forefinger. Primates possess what are called prehensile hands and feet which are adapted for grasping. With this, they can move up and down tree trunks or from branches to branches by grasping and clutching. And those mammals which do not have their trait have to rely on others means, as for instance, digging in their claws in order to hold on the trees or branches. The shape of primate hands and feet gives from a firm hold and cuts over tree trunks and branches. Among primitive claws have got reduced and nails have become flattened compared with cats and dogs. The way in which the finger have evolved, they are separated from each other, and the opposition of the thumb to the forefinger makes it possible for primitive to put their hands around an object and enclose it. Moreover, the forelines have the capacity to rotate, to flex, and to extend. During their evolution, primitive have acquired stereoscopic vision. This means that their eyeballs are located in such position that the two fields of visions combine to give a three-dimensional picture of their surrounding. Stereoscopic vision makes it easier for them to argue distance and depth, which is most important for moving about in trees. Some other mammals, for example birds like the falcons, to possess stereoscopic visions. Primitive began evolve around 70 million years ago. For several millions years, they evolved as a competent tribal dwellers. Their spatial feature, prehensile hands and feet, extensive use of forelimbs, stereoscopic vision, were designed for adaptation to an arboreal habitat. Trees provided them with almost everything that they required for subsistence, mainly fruit, leaves, insects, and bird eggs. They moved about among branches and jumped from tree to tree without having to come down on the ground. People in most parts of India are familiar with monkeys and these with which they move about in trees. All the living and extinct species of primates are classified into two subgroups, suborders and the prosimi and the anthropoidea. The prosimi are more primitive and they are earliest to evolve. The suborder Anthropoidea includes more advanced primitive monkeys, apes, and humans. The Poricimi included lemurs, lorises, and pterosaurs. Some zoologists have classified three shares: Topoidea with prosimians. Three shares are very small squirrel-like creatures who might represent the transition from insectivores to early primitives. The various species of prosimi are mainly found in Africa and South Asia. Lemurs are confined only to Madagascar. These primitives are relatively small in size, however they possess very large eyes. The eyes are placed close together at the front of the skull, not on the side. What distinguishes prosimy from Anthropoidea is the structure of the bones which our eyeballs are placed. The eyeballs of the prosimy are located in a ring-like structure, whereas the eye sockets of the Anthropoidea are bowl-like in shapes. The rings-like structure of bones in which the eyeballs of the prosimy are placed restrict the field of vision of these creatures. The bowl-like shape of the Anthropoidea eye sockets gives greater freedom to the eyeballs to move in different directions and at various angles. This was important for better sight. The Anthropoidea first got separated from the prosimy about 40 million years ago with the evolution of the monkeys. The suborder Anthropoidea is divided into three subgroups: or superfamiliar. Two superfamilies are those of monkey. These two superfamilies are labeled Archopodia Old World monkeys and Sibodia New World monkey. The difference between them related largely to their dental structure and need not detain us. Suffice it to say that monkeys had highly developed forelimbs, better vision, flatter faces, and shorter nods as compared to prosimians. Their adaptation to an arboreal habitat was extremely specialized. They could cover long distance in jumping from tree to tree. In some species like the langur and elongated tails could be used to almost as an additional limb. The tail also helped to balance the body while jumping, and langur can clear remarkable long distance in jumping from one tree to another, and is carefully jumped is almost like a short flight. This is illustrative of very specialized adaptation to an arboreal habitat. The dexterous prehensile limbs of monkey represent an important stage in our own evolution. In the late 19th century, there was overwhelming resistance of Darwin's suggestion that we are descended from monkey. The similarities are too obvious, but there is often a failure to recognize the descent. This reflected a particular way of thinking, which is not very easy to sense. Usually, when one sees a monkey, say, peeling a banana, the immediate reaction is that the monkey way of handling object with its hand it's so very like the humans. Monkey learn to use their hands in the way we do much before humans evolve. Therefore, it is we who behave like them rather than the others way around. The next stage in our evolutionary history was the emergence of apes about 30 million years ago. Apes and humans are placed in the superfamily Hominidae, which is the third superfamily of sovereign Anthropoidea. The other two beings, those to which the monkeys belong. There are several species of apes: chimpanzee, gorillas, gibbons, orangutans, etc. They are all collectively grouped in the family Pongidae. To repeated order, suborder, superfamily, family, genus, and species are some of the categories used by zoologists for classifying animals. In other words, the superfamily Hominidae is divided into two families: Pongidae apes and Hominidae human beings, and extinct species of closest ancestor of humans. Apes and humans belong to the same superfamily and are closest to each other. Among surviving species, they probably first separated from monkeys in the extensive African forest. The evolution of apes was one way of adaptation to the environment in a somewhat different way. Apes are relatively larger in size than monkey. They have large serine teeth and are powerfully built. Some species of apes, chimpanzee, gorillas, and orangutans have long forelimbs as compared to their hind limbs. Others, like the gibbons, have a small body and long arms and legs. The gibbons and chamois are therefore placed by some zoologists in family on their own, Hylobatids. Unlike monkeys, apes are not adapted exclusively to an arboreal habitat. They climb trees in search of food and for protection. By they attempt to regularly exploit resources on the ground as well. Gorillas are heavy animals and spend most of their time on the others. Adult chimpanzees to have some difficulty in moving about in trees with agility gorillas and chimpanzee adopt a semi-erect posture while walking on the ground. They use their legs and hands for movement and rely on their knuckles to assist them while walking. The patterns of substances evolved by apes was a success and by adopted 20 million years ago the number of apes species in Africa was larger than that of monkeys. It was around this time that some significant development were taking place. Fossils evidence has revealed the evolution of an ape which lived in Africa about 20 million years ago and was very well adapted to living on the ground. This time is referred as the Dryopithecus from Africa is a species moved into Asia about 15 million years ago. We learned from zoologist that 15 years ago the Africa-Arabian landmass collided with Asia, thereby bringing the two continents together. This created the condition and expansion from Africa into Asia. A branches of Dryopithecus then separated and evolved into a small ape-like creation. Which has been named Ramapithecus. The first fossils of Ramapithecus were discovered in India 1930. Subsequently, in the nearly 1960s, it was suggested that Ramapithecus was the earliest known species of hominids. In other words, that Ramapithecus represents the point at which hominids separated from apes. However, the fossils evidences on which the initial interactions was based was extremely scanty. A small fragment of this so extensive work is still going on the Shivalik Hills to discover Ramapithecus fossils. And there have been some discoveries in the Rawalpindi areas. Ramapithecus was adapted to environment in which forest growth was not very dense, but it is doubtful whether it could walk upright. Ramapithecus became extinct about 8 million years ago. Recent advances in molecular biology have reduced our dependence on fossils evidence. Molecular evidences this mainly involve comparing DNA of living species, calculating the rate at which changes, mutation which might have occurred, has brought to light a startling feature of the evolutionary process. The evolutionary path of Asia and Africa has diverged a very long time ago in terms of their DNA. Asian apes are much more different from African apes than African apes are from humans. Humans stand much closer to African apes than was suspected earlier. Asian apes had begun evolve different almost 15 million years ago. When they moved into Asia, the Ramapithecus belonged to this evolutionary process 12 million years ago. The African apes they diverged from Asian 15 million years ago and proceeded along a different path. There are now 3 surviving species of African apes. These are the gorilla and the common and pygmy chimpanzee. 7 million years ago, African ape got split into 2 branches. One of the branches led directly to human beings. The revised picture of human evolution that would now have suggested that humans are descended from African apes, gorilla, chimpanzee rather than Asian apes. and that the earliest humans got separated from Africa apes relatively recently. 7 million years ago, not 15 million years ago, shot earlier. If we accept evidences from molecular biology, then we can date the earliest hominids to about 7 billion years ago. Unfortunately, there is a big gap in the fossils record for the critical period between 8 million and 4 million years ago. The fossils which belong to the period from about 4 million years ago indicate that hominids evolved in two phases. The first phase was marked by the development of bipedalism and bipedal locomotion, walking on two feet. The second phase saw rapid expansion in brain size. The Darwinian views was that both fishes had evolved simultaneously. These views had persisted in the present century. In all fairnesses to Darwin, it needs to be pointed out that Darwin's understanding was mainly based on comparative anatomy. A comparison of the physical structure of living species and apes. No early human fossils were available in Darwin times, with the exceptions of Neanderthals fossils. Generally, too, the study of fossils was in its infancy. However, even with more fossils evidences in the 20th century, some scholars have found it difficult to abandon the view that bipedalism and large brain size developed together. It need to the side that there was a gap of at least 3 million years between two the development. Fossils evidences when combined with molecular evidences point towards the beginning of bipedalism 7 million years ago. Some species of American apes become bipedal about this time. This might have been caused by environmental changes leading to more open grassland. The lower limbs of these apes increasing in length as compared to their upper limbs. They acquired an erect posture. They could walk on 2 feet. This development did not immediately result in the increase in brain size. As W.E.L.E. Gross Clark observed in his work, the fossil evidences for human evolution, whereas size of brain is certainly the distinctive feature of humans. It is not the disc. Distinctive feature of hominids is diet. According to Le Gros Clark, initially the crucial difference between early hominids and apes lay in bipedalism among early hominids. Of the different species of bipedal apes that might have evolved soon after 7 million years ago, probably one developed a large brain size. This bipedal creature with a significantly larger brain separated from other bipedal hominids about 250 million years ago and began making crude tools somewhat later. Before proceeding further, it is necessary to mention that modern humans are the only surviving species of hominid. All other species are extinct, and the only information that we have of them is derived from two fossils. On the basis of fossils, the hominids, including our own species, are divided into two genera: the genus Australopithecus and genus Homo of this. Australopithecus was the first to evolve. What separated it from the apes was the ability to walk upright on two lower limbs. Australopithecus fossils were originally discovered and recognized in 1924 by Raymond Dort in South Africa. It was Dart who labeled the fossils as Australopithecus southern ape What Dart had discovered was a fossils of Australopithecus africanus, which lived between 3 and 1 million years ago. Later, a number of other fossils of Australopithecus were discovered in South Africa. Some of them had features which differed from those of Australopithecus africanus. A close scrutiny of these features indicate that there were actually two different species, Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus robustus. The robustus had large thick teeth and a flatter forehead. As compared to the Africanus forehead was steeper, sloping downward, and the skull was more rounded at the top. Robustus males had a bone series at the top of their skull. In both the species, the thick teeth, molar and premolar, different from those of apes. Unlike Australopithecus, thick teeth were flat, which suggested they were adapted to grinding through plant foods rather than soft fruits. It has been suggested that while Australopithecus robustus was herbivorous and Australopithecus africanus was omnivorous and it died including meat. But such specialization is not fully established. Incidentally, males of Australopithecus species are much larger in size than females. This is called sexual dimorphism. These features gradually disappeared with the evolution of Homo. In the 1950, important discoveries of Australopithecus fossils were made in East Africa. The husband and wife team of Louis and Mary Leakes found Australopithecus remains in the Tanzania at the site located in the Olduvai Zores. They were fossils of species which was different from the Robustus and Africanus. This species was named Zinjanthropus and it's now labeled Australopithecus boise. The most recent evidences pertaining to Australopithecus has come from Ethiopia. Omivili Hadar Australopithecus fossils found here have been identified as belonging to a species which evolved much earlier than Boise, Robustus and Africanus. This species which has pushed back the date for Australopithecus to about 4 million years ago has been named Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus afarensis might be an ancestor of all other Australopithecus species. This is a controversial point and remains to be resolved. As of now, this is the earliest known species of hominid. Australopithecus afarensis, we can see the final stages of transition of bipedal locomotion. This species had acquired an erect posture, but it still retained some of characteristics of apes. The development of bipedal locomotion is a very complex process and requires several changes in the anatomy. The bones of the feet undergo modification which enable them to carry the entire weight of the body. Similarly, knees and the pelvic girdle, the box which the lower bones are attached, have to be shaped in such a way that the comfortable erect posture can be maintained while walking or running on 2 feet. The pelvic girdle has to accommodate large pec muscles and at the same time bolt the weight of the body. The backbone has to be shaped accordingly. This necessities by the requirement of the thorax or chest in apes the backbone inward curving and concave. This shape can be a hindrance for regular upright posture. The weight of the thorax, which is located on the inside of the calf, would make the animals fall forward. An adjustment in the abs shapes of backbone from concave to convex and outward carving assure better balance. In fact, the human's backbone is S-shaped. This assisted in erect posture. In the process of evolving bipedal locomotion, the shape of the thorax to has changes from being funnel shape or conical in apes to cylindrical in humans. While Australopithecus apparently possess most of the essential features of bipedalism, there are still a few survival of ape-like traits. The lower limbs were relatively shorter as compared to humans. The thorax was still conical in shape and the fingers were much more curved as in the chimpanzee. As we have seen, Australopithecus have defiantly de- developed bipedism by about 4 million years ago. There is a big gap in fossils record for the period prior to that. But in view of the molecular evidences, it would appear that the process had been at work since 7 million years ago, when the earliest bipedal apes might have begun to evolve. The point about the large number of anatomical changes outlined above required for the bipedalism is that it would have taken considerable time for these changes to accumulate. However, for several million years, from 7 million years ago to 2.5 million years ago, there was no vital increase in brain size. Australopithecus brain size 450 cc to 550 cc was not very different from that the apes 470 cc to for chimpanzee. Increase in brain size occurred between 3 and 2 million years ago. The possibilities for this had been created partly by changes in the teeth and jaws. The canines were reduced in size and the lower jaw became lighter. Since the lower jaw was lighter, the bones of the upper part of the skull took to corresponding lighter as they did not have to support a heavy mobile lower jaw. This is turned mean that more room was available to the brain. The brain could expand into the space created by thinner, lighter bones in the upper part of the skull. These changes led to a new evolutionary path culminating in the emergence of modern humans. Human beings and their immediate ancestors are placed in the genus Homo. The genus Homo is distinguished from Australopithecus by its larger brain size. One of the oldest fossils of the genus Homo is that of the Homo habilis. This was found near Lake of Turkana in Kenya. Other specimens have been discovered at Olduvai. Homo habilis lived 2 million years ago and had a brain which is considerably larger than that of Australopithecus. Its brain was 800 cc. Homo habilis was a tools maker. For several years there was a reluctant to accept Homo habilis as a species of genus Homo, and in some books it is placed in the category of Australopithecus, but a close examination of the brain size of the adult Homo habilis has entitled it to be regarded as an early human specimen. The emergence of Homo habilis was followed by the emergence of another species of Homo erectus. Homo erectus fossil date back to 1.75 million years ago. The earliest Homo erectus fossils are from East Turkana in Kenya. Homo erectus was almost like modern human beings, apart from bipedal locomotion as and well developed, hence it had a larger brain. It was much taller than the Australopithecus. The Homo erectus brain was about 1,000, which is nearly 70% the size of Homo sapiens brains. Homo erectus made tools with great skill. Tool techniques will be discussed in the next chapter. From the time of Homo erectus onward, Homo began to move out of Africa into Asia and Europe. All fossils belonging in the Australopithecus and Homo habilis have been discovered exclusively in South and East Africa, confirming Darwin's conjecture that humans originated in Africa with Homo erectus, the immediate ancestor of humans, spread to other parts of the world. Richard Leakey has calculated that the migration out of Africa may have been at the rate of 20 kilometers per generation, thus covering 14,000 kilometers between East Africa and China in 20,000 years. Nevertheless, the majority of Homo erectus might have continued to live in Africa. The fossils of Homo erectus were first discovered in Indonesia. These were fossils of Pithecanthropes found in Java. The terminology can sometimes be confused depending on the date when a label was used and the individual preference of scholars, but it should be borne in mind that Pithecanthropus erectus, Pithecanthropus javanensis, Java man, Pithecanthropus pekinensis, Sinanthropus, etc. are now all conventionally called Homo erectus. Homo erectus fossils are also found in China, parts of Europe. The Indonesia Homo erectus fossils are at least 900 years old, and the Chinese fossils are 500 to 350,000 years old. For nearly 60 to 70,000 years, different species of Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus coexist. Natural selection eventually led to the extinction of Australopithecus and Homo habilis. From 1 million years ago, only Homo thrives. This should not be taken to mean that Homo erectus was more successful at adaptation. After all, Australopithecus had survived for at least 3 million years, if not longer, whereas Homo erectus exists for 1.5 million years. This possible reason for the extinction of Australopithecus continued to be the subject of lively debate. Homo erectus became extinct nearly 400,000 years ago. Meanwhile, a new species of Homo had branched out and embarked on a separate path of evolution. This new species of Homo emerged about 125,000 years, 135,000 years ago, according to some scholars. These were the Netherlands were early Homo sapiens. They are named Homo sapiens Netherlands. Our species is named Homo sapiens. Their fossils were first discovered in Germany in 1856 and have been widely known ever since. The Netherlands' brain size saw further expansion. Stone tools become more efficient and what we recognize as sculpture become more and more visible, but the Netherlands schools were thicker and less rounded at the top than those of modern humans. The Neanderthals population began to dwindled about 50,000 years ago, and the species became extinct 34,000 years ago. What should be underlined is that Neanderthals represented only one evolutionary path of the genus Homo. Strictly speaking, true Neanderthals fossils have been mainly found in the part of Europe and West Asia, but other fossils which closely resembled modern humans have been found in various parts of Africa. It is likely that around 125,000 years ago, clearly Homo sapiens separate branches into Neanderthals and Homo sapiens on the basis of recent fossils and molecular evidences. Research leakage has put forth a strong argument for the African origin of Homo sapiens. In any cases, there were several types of Homo sapiens which coexist for a long time. Apart from Neanderthals, these Homo sapiens, including species whose fossils have been found in Broken Hill in Zambia, 110,000 years, Kapse in West Asia 92,000 years, and Cro-Magnon in West Europe 40,000 years. One of these might have evolved into Homo sapiens and coexist with the rest down to about 4 to 30,000 years ago, when all other species and subspecies became extinct, leaving only our species. Subsequently, there has been no evolution at the species or subspecies level, and even though there are some superficial differences, complexion stature, Homo sapiens remains a unified and homogeneous species. With the emergence of Homo sapiens, the size of the brain increasing to an average of 1350 cc. However, scholars are divided into their opinion as to whether more increasing in brain size and how much significant once Neanderthals and other Homo sapiens had evolved. With nonetheless the size of the brain had equaled that of Homo sapiens. What then was the direction of further evolution? This is a difficult question to answer because it is linked to the problem of defining what is so very specific about Homo sapiens brain size, speech ability to make increasingly complex tools, and high level of social interaction. A larger brain, when combined with well-developed hands which were free because they were not used for locomotion, had revolutionary consequences, was demonstrated by rapid development of tools technology, augmentation of brain. Science had already reached a point where it was possible to make tools require a high level of skill. The focus has now shifted to understanding the social context of human behavior. Homo sapiens were better equipped for social interaction and cooperation than other Homo sapiens. Some specific scientific evidence has been put forth in support of this view. Philip Lieberman has carefully studied the shape and size of the skull and neck of modern humans in relation to Neanderthals and apes. The skull of Homo sapiens acquired a globular shape, which differed from the low and bulging skull of Neanderthals. The shape of modern human skull introduced modification in the shape of the neck, the most important being that the sound resonating portion of our thorax between the vocal cords and the lip of the mouth was able to produce a greater variety of sound. Through other primates as well as other animals communicate by producing sound. Modern humans are unique in the variety of sound they can produce. This can be combined in an identified number of ways which is reflected in the vast number of languages, living and dead, that human society have produced. Language is now seen by a large number of scholars is the key to understanding the specific of Homo sapiens by Homo sapiens. This is the not just a question of producing a variety of sound for communication, but it's also related to our capacity to arrange our ideas with the help of language. This is turn is associated with the both the size of brain and the manner in which different parts of the brain are organized. Recent studies have indicated that while the size of the brain in Neanderthals was the same as that of our species, there was still scope for changes in the structure of the brain which facilitated the development of language. Apart from its other function, language allows humans to transmit knowledge and information to successive generations in a manner that is not possible for other animals. This means that each generation does not have to start from the secrets. It can build upon the accumulated experience of previous generations. A more developed brain allows the information to be stored. This accelerated the space of cultural adaptation, and humans were no longer dependent on biological evolution. This is theme which will examine in greater details of the following chapter. Thank you.